So today's an interesting one because I'm taking a look at a graphics card that I've literally never actually held before I purchased the thing. And it's also kind of a weird graphics card because it was so similar to another graphics card also by NVIDIA. So the card I'm actually looking at today is the GTX 1660 Super, which was very similar to the 1660 Ti in performance for the end user. So let's take a look at this thing to see how well it performs in early 2023. Now, first and foremost, this came from eBay. The end cost was like $143 and change after shipping, taxes, and everything was taken care of. And this thing came in pristine condition. Like, it still has the plastic wrap all over it. And I don't know whether it was like a B-stock GPU, whether somebody purchased it, it sat in a box and was never even really used, but this thing has absolutely no signs of use, even though it was listed as a used product. Also worth noting with the particular sample that I have here, it's never been opened up, at least as far as I can tell, and the evidence of that is the EVGA sticker over the back mounting screw that is supposed to sort of tell EVGA whether or not the card was ever opened up is still completely intact. So as far as I can tell, this GPU was never opened, so this kind of represents the best case scenario of purchasing a used GPU. Now, the 1660 Super, I sort of already led off with the mention that it was kind of a weird card in that it was very similar to the 1660 Ti. Now, the 1660 Super came out in late 2019 for, I believe, a price of $229 at MSRP. Of course, some partner models were a little bit higher than that in their pricing. Now, for a card from 2019, there are a couple of valid criticisms of the 1660 Super. For one, the memory on board is just 6 gigabytes, which was already a little bit long in the tooth in 2019, especially compared to AMD's offerings at the time, though the 1660 Super did, at least in performance benchmarks, stack up favorably against AMD's similarly priced cards, so that really wasn't a big deal in 2019, though here in 2023, the 6 gigabytes of VRAM is a little bit limiting on what this GPU can do. And then the other criticism that at least I have here in 2019 is the outputs for this particular GPU. There's really just one display port, there's one HDMI port, and then there's one DVI, and that's it. So if you wanted to run like a triple monitor setup with this thing, you would be stuck with one monitor running off of the DVI port, which isn't great. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at a few gaming benchmarks, both at 1080p and 1440p, to see how well the 1660 Super stacks up here in early 2023. Now, as we jump into the data, I just sort of want to point out down here in the bottom left, we have the configuration for the test bench, which is, well, pretty much identical across the board. In fact, it is identical across the board with the exception of the actual resolution and graphical settings of these games I've run here. So the test bench setup, though, is with the Ryzen 7 5700G as the CPU. That's not overclocked. That's just running at stock. We have the GTX 1660 Super here. The RAM configuration was a 2x16 kit running at 3200 megahertz. And then, of course, the graphics settings, all games were run at 1080p as well as 1440p. So just going top to bottom here, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, CSGO at 1080p, high settings. And yes, I understand that most competitive people playing this particular title will not be running at high settings. A lot of people are going to be running at lower settings. But regardless, that's not going to be a problem for this particular title with this configuration for the test bench, because the 1660 Super is way more than capable here. We have the average FPS over 311, the 1% low there at 152.5, and the 0.1% low at just over 125 FPS. Basically, this was a really good experience. There's no reason to not run this game with this particular GPU because, yeah, it's a great experience. Moving on to the same graphic settings, just at 1440p, again with the 1660 Super here. No problems whatsoever. The average did drop down to 237 FPS. The 1% low there, still north of 145, and the 0.1% low north of 117. And once again, this is just a fantastic experience. So if you primarily play games like CSGO that are just fast-paced multiplayer games, then the 1660 Super is actually a really good card for a game just like that. Now moving over to Cyberpunk 2077, starting with 1080p at medium settings, and those settings are set manually, not with the preset, so all of the graphical settings just set there at medium. We're seeing the average a little bit over 81, the 1% low a little over 64, and the 0.1% low right there at 56.4 FPS. And once again, this is a really good experience and a really good showing for the 1660 for all of you out there that are playing at 1080p, based on this game being that this is the most graphically demanding game of the three that I tested out, and really more so graphically demanding than most games out there. It is worth noting that the 1660 Super will give you a really good gaming experience, getting you above 60 FPS in even the most demanding titles at 1080p here in early 2023. And then moving over to 1440p, yeah, still a really good experience at an average of 63.7 FPS. Worth pointing out though, there was one big drop in FPS there in this run, just one major stutter. That could have been down to the CPU doing something weird. That could have been just sort of a random stutter in the game, but it was there and it is worth pointing out. But otherwise, the rest of the run was perfectly fine, smooth, and again, a really good experience. And obviously, even looking at the 1% and 0.1% lows, that one big drop didn't really destroy those bottom statistics either. So I tend to believe that was just sort of a random occurrence. Maybe something was going on in the background while I was playing that title in that particular run. So there you go, the 1660 Super with even demanding games at 1440p. It's not going to give you super high refresh rate success. Like, it's not going to give you 144 FPS to match with a high refresh rate monitor, but it is a really good experience and still worth checking out if you're okay with 60 FPS. And then moving on to a fast-paced game like Doom Eternal at 1080p on high settings. Yeah, I think the statistics sort of speak for themselves here. The average is 131, the 1% low just shy of 100, and the 0.1% low at 90.5. Obviously a really good experience. Moving over to 1440p, the average was just barely shy of 100 FPS, the 1% low there at 72.5, and the 0.1% low was right at 60 FPS. So pretty obvious here that Doom Eternal, which runs well on a lot of hardware configurations, also runs really well with this particular configuration. Now, a couple of the other sensor pieces of data that I want to point out, and I'll go to Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p to kind of give you the sort of worst case scenario here on the GPU. What I really wanted to point out though was the GPU temperature in all of these titles maxed out right at 70 or 71 degrees Celsius. So for at least this card, which has a 2-fan configuration, the GPU core temperatures were just fine, not worrisome whatsoever. So it is conclusion time. The 1660 Super is actually a really solid GPU for under $150 if that's what you can find it for. And if you're trying to build a roughly $500 gaming PC, you're going to be hard-pressed to do better than the 1660 Super, especially if you can get one in anywhere near as good a condition as I was able to get this one off of eBay, which is to say basically brand new condition. Hopefully you'll be able to find one, though, that's still in very good condition yourself if you decide to go that route. But it's a fairly inexpensive card. It still gives you good 1080p and really even 1440p performance, depending on games and settings. And because the price is right, it really does a good job fitting into that $500-ish build if you're trying to get started into PC gaming on something of a budget. But that's basically it from the 1660 Super, at least for now. Let me know your thoughts in those comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe. All those things super helpful for the channel. If you want to see more content like this, then stay tuned. With all that said, I'm Shane from Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you all in the next video.